Welcome, Michael Wickerson here, doing a dry run and a practice of a live session I'm going to do at Perkins Eastman Technology Marathon in a week's time. So this will be online after the event, and obviously if you're watching it now, the event's already happened. So I'm very excited about this, and let's get started. So, wonderful lineup of I've got a lot of research to do before I get into this, and I hope I can cap this with a little something before we get the virtual closing afterwards. But it looks like I've been put under the category of fabrication, so let's start with that. My name's Michael Wickerson. I've been the chair of sculpture on and off over the last 23 years at the Kansas City Art Institute. And I am Canadian, and I moved down to the States in 2001, and I am happily married with 3 kids living out in Kansas. So let's take a look at what the past has led to. Influence of how I started and why I do think of myself as a foundry man with digital tendencies. The influence came pretty much from going to the University of Waterloo for math and computers, but leaving that program in the 2.5 year and moving into the visual arts program. Studied under Bruce Taylor, a fellow that graduated at Alfred, large heavyweight ceramic and mixed media pieces. Really did fall in love with these. Apologize for the images a little faded, but it's these come from old slides, go from old images that I brought out. Just really valued the kind of simple geometries and mechanics of these, which actually get pretty complex when you actually look at them in a sense of gravity. I also fell in love with a fellow from my hometown, London, Ontario, Murray Favreau, not only because of his bands and experience in playing in the Nihilist Spasm band and other things, but he showed at the Chris Cutts Gallery, and I know that from the floor in this picture. But these were documented by photographer Yaroslav Rodich, and I joined that gallery, but I always admired the artists that were working upstairs, and these are all made of wood. And this is one of his pieces collected in the National Gallery. Took a diesel engine and downsized it 2/3 scale, and his drawings always drew me into the installations. Ed Zelenik, another fellow that if I look back at the heavyweight steel that was being used in these pieces, a really interesting connection to work I'm making 20, 30 years after this, in a sense of its geometries, its multiples, and its parametric design. This is a nice one that's based in the drawing that's been etched onto those plates, but you can see those heavyweight steel bricks that were put into this installation. Very excited about seeing those installs at a very young age, moving out from undergrad and moving to Toronto to experience and give a go at being an artist myself. Tim Whitten was a mentor, and I did study with him at York University for my master's, but this is a glass brick piece that holds its own levelness and really a nice connection with the units themselves to actually carry a very, what I conceive a kind of conceptually grand idea. I also worked a lot when I was in Toronto, so I was busy working with not just the fellow artists that had been employed by Noel Harding, but the Elevated Wetlands project on the Don Valley Parkway really got me busy and out into the world and making. So these are large styrofoam blocks that held 6 planters that ended up holding a elevated wetland for purification of the water in the Don Valley using old Goodyear tires and Coke bottles. When I did move down to the States, I'd set up a gallery in the Lady Volkas Gallery basement, and this was fellow faculty Russell Ferguson. You can see the use of his architectures in front of these beautiful drawings that became a backdrop or landscape for those. And Jim Leedy himself was a big influence. He passed away late last year, but this is a monument, and this is a homage of sorts to war. And it was on the cover of Sculpture magazine in 2000. I recall it when I'd just gotten down here, and he was working full-time at the school at the time, and he was a mentor to me. My early sculptures obviously had a major influence from who I was looking at, and I'm starting this on fabrication because I basically made with a very limited means. Some of the earliest objects I made were these gigantic kind of oversized concrete salvaged wood from the Keysweathers Mills north of Kitchener-Waterloo. This was at the University of Waterloo and titled Wheel. I definitely was constantly filling essential hallways with the mechanisms and constructions that I was doing, and they were based on very simple tools and simple machines. The first exhibition I had, I moved out to Toronto and I was picked up by the PKO Gallery, and I was able to apply some very simple mechanisms of levers and pulleys to make this show lifting and pulling. And the only thing it really lacked was the rocks that were to be hauled around by it. I continued through and became gallery artist at the Meg Gallery, cleared out the back space, and regularly showed there. This was an resting machine exhibition in 1998. Kind of going back a year and before kind of gathering up and working with that gallery, I did spend most of my time producing heavyweight multiples, and this was a concrete series of cast plumb bobs with different attachments, all numbered and categorized. I think there was 449 of them. They still sit on Morrow Avenue in Toronto, Ontario, and I do like to go back and visit it once in a while and show my family. If I wasn't working heavyweights, I usually was working multiples to kind of a nth degree. So these were bolts that inspired a series of use value and exchange value at the Meg Gallery in, I think, 1999. After moving down south and moving into Kansas, Lady Vocos had granted me a show in 2005. And very excited to work with very simple means: plaster, burlap, sticks, and there's a bronze wheelbarrow in there kind of lifting its burden into its own scythe wings as a state of grace. But the sense of multiples, parameters always being followed, sculptures always followed tons of series of drawings and sketching and modeling, all analog. And then before buying my property, I kind of was working on series. This was called an instrumental gateway bridge, architecturally made, very short periods of time, chainsaw, raw timber that had already been felled, and then what I could import into the galleries. Foundry was my first passion, and I can say that honestly, even though, as you can tell from the later part of this presentation, digital is definitely the second passion that I pushed in my life since about 2016-17. Foundry, I walked into a beautiful foundry at the Kansas City Art Institute. I've since built a fairly elaborate one on my own property out in Kansas, but this was a plate series that was working with stacking books and working in multiples, and always incorporating the work of the students with it, and even involving their hand in the craft of making some of the shapes themselves. Finishing, patining, making commissions in bronze was very popular, and I enjoyed doing that for several companies, and I still continue to cast as much as I can tolerate in my health. But I cast everything. If there was ginkgo leaves around, I cast ginkgo leaves. If there was feathers around, I cast feathers. And if there was leaves around, I cast leaves. And I actually went so far as to send from Canada glycerin leaves that I could send back and have issued as gifts at consulates and things like that. I would draw a lot, and I was obsessing about the wheeled wagon and the cupola, so I would make models and models of these kind of little dirty bronze wagons, and at some point I literally threw in the towel on creating my own work in bronze, and this is a series of different iterations of fabricating just a towel, wax thrown in, and kind of thinking of making the shift to something different from the analog processes. So this is of at least bronze casting or smaller works. So you can see within these forms a bird, a towel, a baby, an elephant, possibly. What that brings me to is my land. 2009, had my first child with my wife Beth, and we moved into Kansas City, Kansas, and I thought I'd best start shifting gears a little bit. And I, of course, moved large-scale architecture on my land, done physically, but also being inspired and motivated by digital designs. So this is the backyard, and you'll see this come full circle in the last year. Excuse me. I have about 12 acres out here in Kansas. I'm very eager to work collaboratively and talk about future projects that can happen. But back in 2009, I picked up SketchUp for the first time, and I think I did this the most tedious way possible. And I was on a trip to Utrecht, and I was staying with architect friends, and I was like, I better get my hand into this. So after designing it over that stay, I came home and put it on my land through digital means and pinned it there so you could visit it on Google, and this is in 2011. And then with family and friends, I made bricks. I used the clay that was in the land. I made a whole series of adobe. After about 400 of these bricks were rammed, I let them dry on the land, and in the span of a month I produced what inspired me was the text called Hamlet's Mill, the transmission of human knowledge through myth. And I simply put this together in the month of June 2009 on my beginning of my first sabbatical, and enlisting the help of my assistants at the time. It became a bit of a a rain catcher. It became a bit of a home for wild animals to get on my land, and it certainly was an area that I decided without electricity and lights I would kind of forge my own equipment and build my own adobe structures. And I have a real passion for this place and watched many, many seasons. The windows were designed almost collaboratively with ants and other individuals, and it became a home for a rafter of turkeys on my land. Several cast iron artworks started to be generated in and around this. I parachuted it one day, just lit it up on fire, let my kids have fun, my first son, Oscar Wickerson. And this is really where I started to see the repetition even more and architecture within the works I was interested in. Another winter, solid. I built a Grieve foundry behind it, had the help of artists coming out to do cast iron workshops, and then I had the birth of my second son on the land and lit it up for that evening. And Hamlet's Mill's really been a beacon of something, or a symbol of rest and respite for me after it was made. It became a little carnivalesque and theater driven and backdropped, and it kind of got out of control with visiting artists and visiting photographers and architects. This was a series called Fire Over Kansas, and there was a short series that came out of it, but it really moved into the kind of absurd and surreal as we went on to kind of finish it. And this was a first series of digital analog prints, so all of it was real, and then it was finished up and touched up by digital in the end. But yes, Matilda was there, the neighbor's donkey, while we were firing off this furnace. Other businesses took it upon for advertising. Four Strange Women, a perfumery in town, used it as a backdrop, and some buildings were taken apart. This one is an example of the Grieve foundry being quartered and stacked into Vasilisa the Beautiful. And as I say, it's come full circle, and that land has been totally effaced this last summer, and it's back to what it looked like initially. And that brings me to the digital influences that started to have a major effect in my life after 2016. PJ Chen has always blown me away with their jewelry design and led me and walked me and handheld me, along with Ron Cheng, a sense of how to learn Grasshopper and start to make models and simulations for what I wanted to do. I was encroaching, mid-40s, and I said, I had to change the means and avoid these ventral hernias I'd given myself over the years. Individuals online that I've followed and met, Mahmoud Ramdan has always been inspiration and connected with me with online while teaching and informed my students, and I've watched him through his education, and I've just watched him land a job in this last week or so, a very nice one. Karel Benzi is one that moves beyond arts for me and moves into data and driving that and data visualization. Very passionate about their work and their projects. Rafik Anadol, obviously, his team of individuals pulling this together has been great inspiration, and I use this as a primer to get people to think about sculpture digitally when they come into our program. Neri Oxman, another individual that most people know, and the collaboration and biomimicry, absolutely adore, and I don't think this is new for anybody if you've looked into it. William Forsythe's robotics, going back to my early tools and simple machines and useless things, robotics is absolutely, I am enthusiastic beyond belief, which doesn't say I know how to do much besides work synthetically or through simulation with them. Carl Singline, I don't know if I should show this video, but I found it online, and he did a wonderful project, flew in to Dubai or something, and he ended up putting together this robot with 5 robots on it, and it just blew me away. I come from a math and computers background. I have a real passion for that. I'd, of course, fallen out from math and computers for about 30 years, and I simply translate textbooks, mathematical textbooks, into Grasshopper scripts now for Rhino 3D modeling. I'm obsessed about it. So if I grab Euclid's Elements and take the first book, I'll just translate those from writing into parametric models and usually animate them. Linear algebra, of course, falling in love with all of that. And I was at a time at University of Waterloo when Pascal and Maple were being taught, C++. And if I stayed there, who knows what I would have done. I'm not sure where I would have ended up. But calculus and trigonometry drive me. I remember as a child grafting things in my spare time. Well, and then late teens doing that to just entertain myself, to keep my mind going. But Wolfram Mathematica has been just incredible to go back into and see it. And Rhino is the tool to do the surface edits. Once you understand the integrals and differentiation, this is usually where I start to disconnect with the art students I teach, but have really reconnected with engineers, architects, programmers, computational designers. And who can forget 3 blue, 1 brown? Sanderson and his work, which is just absolutely amazing, and thrilled to follow. Seeing theory, seeing theory is pretty nice. I thought I had an animation here. Let me try and go back, see if I can get it. There we go. Wonderful examples of using data and algorithms to drive some beautiful geometries. Visualizing algorithms is I've taken a passion for as well, and I move outside of maybe a contemporary conceptually grand art theme to actually find the practicalness of the power of this, and it pushed me into Grasshopper and Python. I did learn C# first, but Python seems to be the language that opens up many more libraries for what I may do in my works, my models, and simulations in the future. So, food for Rhino. Take a look at the apps menu. Go down and find out all the plugins and how they relate to professions and things you could do with this modeling system through a parametric, plugins, or your own development. Grasshopper Docs is absolutely incredible. It takes your thousands of items and turns them into tens of thousands of nodes. And the optimization engines and the generative design is just incredible as well. And Python, of course, is one that I've found as the language that's most common, most shared with the people online and who I'm looking at internationally. And of course, it opens up NumPy as visualizations. It opens up all the matrices I've forgotten about. It opens up Matplotlib, which has a real ability to turn these data visuals into something more than bar charts and pie charts. Not that many industries ask for that, but you can do that creatively. And scikit-learn opens up, then again, more and more libraries that you can take your data into. What I fell into last year was the McNeil's Compute AEC 2001 New York City Hackathon, and I want to go to the one this year, but this brought me into Visual Studio Code, CPython, Flask, and then cloning their repos to then make them live. So the GH-hop server I've had a real passion for over the last few months, and that's where my real design is gone. I'm teaching that online on multiple levels, and I'm generate thousands of lines of scripts. Partly because I can take a Python all-in-one dummies book, I can simply re-script it, not just to share on GitHub Copilot. These scripts are actually running through apps that run live in Grasshopper and actually move because of AI, GitHub Copilot. That's taken somebody that had intermediate at best skills in Python, and now I'm able to tab enter through an entire collaborative approach, which some like and some don't. But for people coming late to this in life, it's wonderful to have this as a tool, but be creative with it, make it your own, translate, and see what you can do. So I can take the most boring book I possibly could find online, automating the boring stuff with Python, and immediately have that generating geometries that may be Boolean, float, whatever, double, integer based and string based, but when I start complicating that with the Rhino 3DM library, or possibly Rhino Common, I'm able to start inputting different types of data types like points and surfaces and lines and curves and generate even more complex things. And it gets to the point that I actually can input through Python tons of libraries and start pulling Excel documents and SQL documents to generate geometries and architectures. And this is where my mind is just kind of spiraled into itself. Experiments, models, and simulations. This was one recently that I just saw somebody else's model, and somebody was inquiring into what that was, and I said, well, it looks like a curve evaluation on top of a surface evaluation. Of course, put that on a variable pipe. So it's very nice when you see a geometry, but you can start conceiving of how to pull it together computationally. Another one is Mathematica. I just absolutely have a passion for. I love these oscillations I put in to think of these as pre-made sculptures and inflatables. They're wonderful to watch because they have that wave and ebb and flow to them. But these are just some of the projects I've done. And I've drawn a ton. I draw a lot. And of course, having an image sampler that you can bring into something. There's a new soccer stadium being planned, and wouldn't it be nice if this was the gantry system above, the scaffold system above it, or truss system above it, that held the image of the picture that you wanted to import. So that's just a simple idea I'm thinking. I've gone off the rails with a lot of this stuff, just like I did on my land. This is an audio, and it was late June, so it's pretty hot in my house. You tell by the photo, but as I live this up, as I speak to it, Firefly plugin will animate it to what I'm saying. So it's kind of to watch yourself in this kind of bone form. A lot of experimentation like this. Incredible workshop with Omar Ghanetti and others, and in the University of Cairo to actually get into fabricating and pulling together 7-axis robot systems and managing a script that I built from scratch and add my own color and add my own details and push that to a non-planar analysis and end up realizing there's an incredible world out there I could touch on just through simulation and tools. And then of course I'm going to throw it into AR through simple photogram, and I should put some images of that in because I was playing with that at the last MIT Hackathon. But it is a tool that I will take that and then maybe end up in Unity with something, because Photogram has its sliders, and through Junichiro Horikawa's work I'm able to pull that off into Unity and slide that around. So I was very excited about this, but I might just want to play around with this idea of auto hands and constructing and moving robots. And there's as much absurdity in the digital for my work and creative experiments as there was when I was making futile and useless tools and machines. Of course, I may just throw my meshes in and deal with those surfaces of contour and concaves and allow my children to experience this as well, but realize that this is all programmable. Once it's gone digital, it's kind of anything's possible with that. Collaborations, commissions, and there should be an extra S in there, and non-disclosure agreements. Speckle was absolutely the most recent tool that I can jump into, grab an old script, and import that in and let that download to anyone online. So I'm very interested in that as a tool and looking into the cloud as a space of sharing. Dimensional Innovations is a business in town that I'm technically still there, and I wanted to be employed occasionally, which meant I occasionally showed up, and they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I'd like to contemplate. And I got in there with all the people using Grasshopper and Touch Designer, and I stayed a few months and tried to make some connections, but I got a hold of seeing the tail end of all of the 3D large-scale additive manufacturing printer. I took some of those home. I have an incredible foundry at home that I got from Livers Bronze and other ones from KCAI as we upgraded. And then I bring in my auto, and simulate where I'd like a tamper to generate a mold, and then I could pour that in. And there I am on a very simple, big-scale tilt furnace, and I've thought some very simple and unique inverted additive manufacturing techniques I'd love to talk with people about not printing on top of a substance, but actually lifting castings as they go up. And if you have any questions about that, I'd love to talk in detail about that, because that's my own experimentation. I've always worked for the Azander company on and off. Metal Labs, I've done commissions, I've fixed things up. This was all the aluminum pieces that had to be recast on a fallen gantry and canopy. On 12th Street in Kansas City and replaced with aluminum. I've made pieces for them for the art auctions at KCAI. This is Maria Slippage's work, but behind are my test pieces. And I pour aluminum like mad out here because I have access to all that aluminum to experiment with. So drywall molds, techniques, but it's all open air. It's incredibly physical and it's incredibly taxing on the body, but it is fun to do. And some of the surface studies, you'll find that these are not digital in any bit of their fabrication, but they are actually extremely parametric in how I would change the parameters to get the bubbles, to get the oil, to get the colors, to get everything different in this aluminum. The other place I've looked into is Huft in town, and I've had some tours, and they do some beautiful panels. And between DI and Zaner and Huft, I think there's enough work here in Kansas City to experiment with and try and do some creative work. I've been reached out to by Turf, and I'm very excited about that because these parametric models might be something to do on yet another non-disclosure agreement. And then Inspiration, Timo Harbo is just incredible. Nielsen is just like amazing to watch online and see what he does, and he's totally inspires me, and I reach out to as many people as I can. And he's been one to follow up, and he definitely knows what he's doing on an engineering level, and fine and simplicity and done well, and I really enjoy the kind of conversations we hold. Jose Luis Garcia, he's working through Parametric Camp, just blows me away. This is early robotics work of his work. He taught me C#, he taught me parametric design, he taught me everything that I was watching online. MX3D is another inspiration. Gilles, who's working there, it would be nice to connect with their parametric group, with their computational groups, and think what could possibly be designed, printed, and fabricated. I think the future is automating a lot of the welding processes and casting processes I've spent 3 decades focusing on. Anything robotic, you are robotic. Non-lethal would be nice to start, but anything that resembles sculpture and ability to make it is interesting to me. But this is where it brings me to yet another non-disclosure agreement. What if TAM and their structures, I could think to revisit my land now that it's into another decade of iterations. Their Fibonacci house is just incredible to be installed and then custom built and then installed and then added to. The idea of insulation, 3D WASP, another fantastic structure. And I would like you to just look at this structure from the aerial view. And the land in my neighborhood is ready. The land has been flattened. This is an aerial shot of when Hamletsville was built, and then I added other buildings to it. But I can see a second iteration coming with additive manufacturing. And I'm, of course, always looking for investors, always looking for somebody that trusts that I can follow through a project. And it would be wonderful to see Fire Over Kansas rise again in some form out here. And teaching is, of course, a constant thing in my life. It's very challenging. I now have moved into an open source that everything I do is online. Everything I put up on GitHub or these videos, including this one, which will be posted here. I don't have a huge following, but I'd say I don't get trolled by anybody. I think what I do is very helpful to engineers and architects and artists and designers alike. My models are ready to take to any print. I teach constantly with them. Students are totally inspired. This is Charlotte May and Joseph Canizales' work for a soft view project that we actually 3D printed, worked the details, and pulled out multiples for an award. Sergi Espinales is an assistant of mine that's made parametric design, robotics, enter into the sculpture department at the KCAI. And then, of course, support it by limited means, 1, 2, 3 tier levels. I'm interested in learning Rhino with Grasshopper. I'm interested in learning Grasshopper with plugins, and I'm interested in learning Python with Grasshopper hops. And that's what I'm focused on. So thank you very much for watching. I'll post and I'll list where those sites are. And I'm very excited to do this live. And I probably have already done it by the time I posted this video. Michael Wickerson, Wickerson Studios out in Kansas. Contact anytime you want to reach out and talk about shooting around some ideas with a rafter of turkeys.